I tell you what,
It's not like the olden days.
I'm Rosie,
I'm Jade.
and today we're talking to you about Mr. Bean, who, as I think pretty much everyone knows, is a comedy character played by Rowan Atkinson from time to time.
It was mentioned last time how this podcast follows on quite nicely from our previous podcast about Blackadder, and that's what Rowan Atkinson did after Blackadder, followed on directly to Mr. Bean. I think the first episode of Mr. Bean aired in January 1990, which is the year after Blackadder goes forth. And then all the 14 episodes, except the one that was exclusively released on video, Unseen Bean, actually, I should say, all the original episodes were shown by 1995. Occasionally for a treat on ITV. And then Bean the movie, which was made because the Americans enjoyed it too, came out in the summer of 1997. So they were obviously working quite hard on that when the main series ended. And then Rowan came back 10 years later, in 2007, for Mr. Bean's Holiday, the other Mr. Bean movie. And between the two movies, there was the animated series, which Rowan was heavily involved with, did vocalisations for, acted out little scenes to help them animate. So he was certainly being Mr. Bean, creating Mr. Bean for 17 years straight, and as you say, he still pops up in like Snickers adverts and things occasionally, doesn't he? So you never know when you've seen the last of him.
Yes, and he was in the London 2012 Olympics opening ceremony, doing a sort of comedy keyboard thing with the band.
Very much an in-the-soup comedy character who it's not surprising to see from time to time.
And as you were saying, Mr. Bean mostly happened in the early to mid-90s when we were children, and we used to enjoy watching him as children, didn't we?
Very much.
Because he does things which are very obviously funny in the sense that you wouldn't do it, your mum and dad wouldn't do it, like when he's going round the shops and he's testing the potato peeler with the potato that he's brought, and then the next stage up from that is that he's choosing a frying pan and he pulls out this fish from his jacket and puts it in the pans to see where his fish will fit, and that kind of thing.
It's delightfully surreal humour, but not surreal in the sense that it couldn't very easily happen within the parameters of our world. Just in the sense that he would never do it because it's extremely weird.
And unlike Blackadder and other sitcoms, there isn't anything you have to really listen for and get when you're older. Sort of subtle, clever, witty jokes that go over your head. It's all visual with the occasional vocalisation and some lines from supporting characters like Richard Wilson as the dentist, the first one that pops into my mind. It's very, very visual comedy, and that's why people from other countries like it, as someone, perhaps Rowan, was explaining to me on one of the special features on my DVD. It was very popular on the continent.
It's very much Rowan going back to his roots, of course. Blackadder, he showcased a lot of great comedy skills, but his funny physical comedy perhaps wasn't chief among these. And as he has told us in documentaries and things, that's how he got into comedy, standing in front of the mirror and making funny faces and things like that, doing funny things. And on Not the 9 O'Clock News in the early 80s, he'd done a lot of funny faces, funny walks, funny Mr. Bean voice, and that famous sketch that everybody loves where he's choosing what's going to go in his new bathroom, and he chooses 14 toilets.
And the guy, I think, is it Mel Smith, advising him, or is it one of the others, I don't know, is saying, well, you could have a bath, you could have a shower, he's going, there's not as much use as a toilet, is it? And he's just filling it up with toilets, which sounds really stupid when we talk about it. But if you watch it with Rowan Atkinson doing the voice and putting all these orange, which is obviously the funniest colour, model bathroom things in this box, it's hilarious. I don't know if everyone loves it quite as much as I do. I'm absolutely killing myself laughing at that one.
And of course, the shades of that in Mr. Bean's Christmas, where he's doing his little adapted nativity scene with the T-Rex and the sheepdog and everything. So, yes, it really is Rowan going back to his roots, taking a sidestep from Blackadder, doing something a bit different, something more like what he used to do, and in its own way, it's as funny and as memorable and as good a sitcom, for want of a better word, as Blackadder, but it's very, very different
Well, when I was little, I remember our mum explaining to me the difference between a sitcom, stand-up comedy, and a sketch show. And then one day I wanted to know, well, what's Mr. Bean then? Because it's sort of a sitcom and it's sort of sketches. He doesn't really have a does he, a situation. He just lives in his flat and tries to get on with life in very unconventional ways. It's the character rather than the situation, which is more of how you get a sketch. But it's always the same character and the same continuity, so it's kind of the child of a sketch show and a sitcom. And he does all these wacky things that, for want of a better word, normal people or the rest of us wouldn't do. But I was thinking lately about how he does always find a way around a problem. He thinks outside the box, and even though it's socially completely unacceptable, it always works what he tries to do, doesn't it? Like when he has to get his new chair home, and he's got his very iconic, I was going to say famous, but that's inadequate, his iconic yellow Mini. He straps the chair onto the top of the Mini, fills up the rest of his car with all his paint and stuff, sits on the chair, rigs up these ropes and pulleys to control the steering wheel and the brake and clutch and accelerator, or perhaps not the clutch. I'm not sure if he changes gear.
No, I don't think he does. I think he just drives home first.
And I don't know how they did some of it. I mean, obviously the roads must have been closed, but there are bits where he's driving on the road, very, very quick bits with other traffic, aren't there?
Yes, indeed. Stuff you probably couldn't get away with filming nowadays, no matter how many safety barriers you set up.
Which reminds me of when he's going to the dentist and he gets dressed in the car, and we used to love that sequence when we were little. It's one of the ones we had recorded on video, isn't it? And he's taking off his pyjamas and putting on his clothes all whilst driving and making his trademark funny faces the entire time, and he's cleaning his teeth as well in the car.
With the windscreen washer, absolutely brilliant.
And when in Mind the Baby, Mr. Bean, the baby who turns out to be Elliot Henderson Boyle, who I think we must have talked about in the Watership Down podcast, needs a new nappy, and Mr. Bean doesn't have a new nappy, so he cuts up this teddy bear and turns it into a nappy for this baby. You'd never think of that, would you?
It always makes me feel quite nostalgic, that buying the new chair and paint and DIY stuff that he's doing, because he's rushed along for the New Year's sales. Even that's now part of a pastime. You don't have New Year sales anymore, it's all Boxing Day sales.
And they tend to start before Christmas anyway, the Boxing Day sales.
But the bit I particularly liked when I was very small, and we didn't have this one on video for a very long time, where Mr. Bean's doing something in a way that we wouldn't do it, is where he has his sandwich on the park bench, and instead of buying a sandwich like Angus Deaton, who's sitting next to his gun, or bringing a sandwich that he'd made at home, he brings the ingredients to make a sandwich and a cup of tea, and then makes it in the park. And does things like make tea in the hot water bottle, and cut this loaf of bread with scissors and spread the butter on with his Barclay card.
You're going to bring all that, you might as well bring a knife, but
Yes, exactly.
he uses his Barclay card because he's Mr. Bean.
And then he has this salad leaves that he tosses in his sock with water from the water fountain. And this jar of fish that he's going to put in the sandwich. It's absolutely hilarious. You think, well, you could do all that, but nobody ever would.
No, you don't want to, do you? When we had an opportunity to watch Mr. Bean as adults after not having watched it for some years, I remember thinking, oh, am I going to enjoy this? Am I going to find it funny? Perhaps it's really something you grow out of. And then I was absolutely killing myself laughing.
I recorded it all off ITV3 about 8 years ago when they said, oh, look, we're going to show all this Mr. Bean. And I, too, was surprised how funny it still was. But yeah, it really is something you can appreciate at any age and not really change how you appreciate it.
Yes, it wasn't that long afterwards I bought the DVDs. They were in some deal on Amazon, and I thought, oh, Mr. Bean, I'll get that. And of course, the ones he recorded cut a couple of bits, didn't he? Like when he exposes himself to all those women at the swimming pool. I was awfully disappointed not to see that, which makes me sound very strange, but it's the climax of that whole sequence, so it should have been there. But of course he loses his swimming trunks in the swimming pool, and he has to avoid anyone seeing him. And I love that sequence where he's going up the diving board looking very happy and confident, and then he gets to the top and he can't dive off, and he's like curling up in a ball and stuff, which not any actor could pull off, could they? It's all Rowan Atkinson's physical comedy making it work.
Absolutely brilliant.
They talk about, in the documentaries and things, when they're devising Mr. Bean, they're coming up with ideas, and then Rowan acts them out before they decide whether they're going to work or how they're going to work.
I guess that's where the idea for the animated version came from. They were saying, well, if we're going to do that with Rowan, why shouldn't we then animate some of those and turn them into a more specifically aimed at children cartoon? And that's what they did, for better or worse.
That makes me think of Irma, who we always used to call Mr. Bean's girlfriend. I don't know how official she is as his girlfriend, and they have some ups and downs in their relationship, don't they? Being Mr. Bean, he doesn't really get it when she wants to kiss him and get given a ring by him and that kind of thing, but he does seem to want to go out with her and get jealous when she's dancing with another guy because he's annoyed her at the disco. Like Princess What's-Her-Name and Earthworm Jim, really. He doesn't really understand these things.
Yes, exactly the same.
And you've watched the cartoon more than I have, but I've seen it a bit and I can see what you mean. You were telling me about how, for the cartoon, they made Irma more of a female Mr. Bean, and she's got her own teddy, which of course is another Mr. Bean icon, his teddy, and she does similar sorts of things, but probably to less extreme.
Yes, very much is what they did. They made characters out of the landlady and her cat, who were mentioned in Mr. Bean's diary, which was this tie-in thing published in the mid-90s. Mrs. Wicked, I think her name is. They turned her into a character cartoon, and various figures that you see around in Mr. Bean's life, which is quite different from the live-action show. Of course, another recurring character that was supposed to be in it, we found out, and it's obvious once you know, is Mr. Sprout, who appears in the very first episode of Mr. Bean, entitled Mr. Bean, in the church-going segment, and he's played by Richard Briers.
You can see a lot of famous faces as supporting characters in Mr. Bean. We mentioned Angus Deaton, now Richard Briers. There are loads, aren't there? And Richard Wilson, I said. But yes, I remember working out that he was probably intended to be, if they ever made another one, perhaps they didn't know if they would, but they thought he was going to be, if they did, Mr. Bean's kind of regular annoyee, the person who gets annoyed by him the entire time. When I saw in the cast that his name was Mr. Sprout, I thought, perhaps they thought they were going to have him again. And he was implied to be the driver of the blue three-wheel van who Mr. Bean's always running off the road and stuff.
Yes, so arguably perhaps Mr. Sprout is in Mr. Bean recurring further after the first episode, but we just don't see him because it seems to make a lot of sense that he owns that Robin Reliant that Mr. Bean victimises, and one of the things he does is push it out of its parking place at the church, so you know that its driver is inside somewhere. And that was something they included in the cartoon, Mr. Bean running the Robin Reliant off the road the whole time. I think they stuck with it in the cartoon longer than they did TV series, live-action TV series, and there's only so much you can do with it in the live-action TV series, of course, which is why it's quite good in a very late one, Tee Off Mr. Bean, where they do something a bit different, and Mr. Bean's thumbing for a lift to go back to the crazy golf course with his golf ball, and he refuses this lift from Mr. Sprout, or whoever is in the Robin Reliant that stops for him. It's a nice callback to the early days there, and it has the original Mr. Bean theme music that they haven't used for a while playing over when we see the Blue Robin Reliance. That's a nice little reference there, a nice extra use of it.
Yes, Mr. Bean does just dislike things and people for no reason, doesn't he? Which is another funny thing. He gets into these rivalries and competitions with total strangers. Like, the first thing we see him do is take this maths exam, and the guy sitting on the desk next to him is putting out a couple of pens. So Mr. Bean pulls out hundreds and hundreds of pens and just keeps laying them on the desk.
I always think of Mr. Bean in Room 426, where he has this stupid competition to do everything with the man in the room next to him, including get downstairs first, get upstairs first, eat the most at the buffet. And that's why Mr. Bean ends up eating all these oysters that the guest he's trying to have this rivalry with says are off and doesn't eat any, and Mr. Bean worries he's going to be sick all night. It's extremely amusing and random how he feels the need to just have these random rivalries with people he hasn't bumped into.
Yes, and another aspect of his character that actually I didn't really get when I was younger is that he's very happy and content to do these things by himself. In the Christmas one, it's very funny. He sits down to write these Christmas cards, goes out of the door, and then immediately they come back through his letterbox, and then he hangs them up with all these other identical cards, and we always say, oh, he should have got a variety. But I used to feel sorry for him as a child. Oh, no, he has to write his own birthday card. But actually, he likes writing his own birthday card and not really having any friends apart from Irma, who he finds it very difficult to interact with. And he's not always very nice to people, is he? The guy who steals his trousers accidentally from the changing rooms at the open day at school.
Yes, of course, Christopher Ryan, who everybody knows from Bottom and The Young Ones and Doctor Who and things like that.
And you can relate to that, can't you? Because when you're at school, people, at least once anyway, accidentally took your clothes in the changing room, and you wish that you had Mr. Bean's lack of inhibition just to go up to the toilet cubicle where you see your clothes and pull them out from under the door.
Yeah, because that's what they deserve. That's made me think how sometimes Mr. Bean comes across as a bit of a child in a grown-up's body. And there's this bit where he doesn't like the look of any of the magazines in the dentist's waiting room, and he wants to read this Batman comic that this little boy has got. And so he pours the water from the vase of flowers onto the little boy's shorts and makes him and his mum think he's pissed himself, and the mum's all cross. Right, get in the car! So Mr. Bean gets to read the Batman comic.
Yes, we used to find that one with the driving to the dentist and the Batman comic and everything absolutely hilarious, didn't we? And then isn't it followed by that rather poor one where he's being bothered by this fly trying to have a picnic? He's trying to have a picnic, not the fly.
Yes, a great letdown after all that fantastic beginning. Yes, as you say, the driving in sequence, stabbing the dentist in the leg with his anaesthetic, doing his own fillings, absolutely brilliant.
Draining that cup of liquid with the little vacuum cleaner thing. He's just messing about with a little vacuum cleaner and he sticks it in the cup of liquid and it sorts that stuff. And of course, his reaction that's very funny. It's like, whoops, I shouldn't have done that, mate.
That episode is top drawer Mr. Bean in the first part, followed by bottom drawer Mr. Bean with the fly bothering him at his picnic. So yeah, it was a bit of a letdown to watch in that way when we used to find it on the video.
And then I don't think this occurred to me particularly as a child, but it did watching this stuff again as an adult. In the Hollywood movie, where they're very much hero and villain centered, aren't they, those kinds of movies, Mr. Bean is much nicer and more compassionate and more feeling towards people. He has to live with, temporarily, Peter MacNicol and his family, and he makes a connection with the young son, Kevin, and tries to be nice to everyone in the family and to everyone that he meets, really. He's much more of a traditional hero in the sense of what he wants to do and his outlook on life, but of course he does Mr. Bean things and totally messes everything up and ends up destroying a priceless painting, and the consequences are going to be mostly on Peter MacNicol's character, and Mr. Bean really cares and wants to sort it out for his sake.
Absolutely brilliant Peter MacNicol, who we mentioned very early on in our Ghostbusters podcast, rightly so. Does an absolutely fantastic performance there.
I was saying, wasn't I, when we watched it, it's a very difficult role to play, being a normal kind of straight man to Mr. Bean, but also being funny in your own way and not getting totally overshadowed and supporting him in all those different ways. He does it so well.
It's interesting how that film, the first film, Bean, the Ultimate Disaster movie, in some ways is less like the main series itself than Mr. Bean's Holiday is like the main series itself. It has a lot more dialogue, the first movie, for one. thing.
Yes, and not just from Mr. Bean. He speaks occasionally just like he does in the series, but it's the other character that's very much what I would have expected actually from a Mr. Bean movie. Give him a supporting cast who do most of the talking, but it's for that reason that a lot of people say they don't like it, isn't it?
I think it's a very good amalgamation of the movie for an American audience who want to hear some Americans talking a lot of the time, and Mr. Bean and the sorts of things he does in the television show. I was glad they cut out the whole turkey sequence from the Christmas special, repeated shot for shot in that movie. There was enough of a reference back to it just by having the turkey there in the first place.
You ever cooked one of these before?
Oh, yes.
He says like it didn't end up on his head and going out of the window and not getting cooked at all.
I remember finding it quite disappointing in the cinema in 1997 when they redid the sick bag on the aeroplane sequence from an early episode. But of course this time they don't fade to black before the bag bursts and you actually see the vomit flying everywhere. It was reused and overdone.
That reminds me of one of those Oddbods things that were on before Fort Boyard Ultimate Challenge, where one of them is swabbing the deck on this ship and another one is sick into the bucket, and then the one who's swabbing is going to put his broom in the bucket and it cuts away, and I thought, oh good, we didn't have to see the sick, it was implied, we know what he's about to do. But then it comes back at the end and we see him swabbing sick on the deck, and I thought, oh, that's so unnecessary.
Bit like in A Million Ways to Die in the West.
I was thinking of that too.
When you say you don't actually need to see the diarrhea in the hat. I think you're absolutely right about that. But then coming back 10 years later for Mr. Bean's Holiday, I suppose we want to see more like the original sketches put together and less like the first movie as a nostalgia value, and I think that works very well. I was reminded of Emma DeCorn, who's one of his main co-stars, Rowan's main co-stars in Mr. Bean's Holiday, when you were talking about how Mr. Bean was popular on the continent.
I was reminding myself of that too.
And there's the video with Emma where she was saying she used to love Mr. Bean when she was teenaged, and her dad brought the videos over from England for her. And of course, everybody knows that her dad, Antoine DeCorn, was over here working in England in the 90s. One of the things he was doing was making Eurotrash for late night Channel 4, doing producing and things as well. So that very much rang true as a story.
I do like Mr. Bean's Holiday. I don't really like to directly compare and say I like one film better than the other, because they do have very different styles and both work very well in their own way. The premise of Mr. Bean's Holiday is that he's won this trip to Cannes, and obviously he gets into all kinds of trouble. He ends up separating this Russian boy, Stefan, from his father and having charge of him, and as the boy playing Stefan puts it,
Max Baldry is his name.
That's right, as Max Baldry puts it in his testimonial in a documentary, he says, we get kicked off the train, we get kicked off the bus, and that kind of thing's happening, and they hook up with Sabine, played by Emma DeCorn, and all sorts of things are going wrong, and they think that he's kidnapped Stepan, isn't it? Not Stefan, sorry, that's the Russian form of that name, and there's police after him and all kinds of things, and then the entire time all Mr. Bean is trying to do is go to the beach, as he explains, when Sabine wants to know what he's up to and why he's kidnapping this child. And he's done all kinds of things. He's chased this bus ticket on a bicycle that's got taken off by a lorry full of chickens. And he doesn't seem to think anything of it. He doesn't think it's out of the ordinary that you have to do all this while you're trying to go to the beach.
Yes, Stefan is watching him and going, What is going on now? I didn't realise he was quite this mad, this bloke I'm trying to get to Cannes with. But yes, it all escalates very quickly.
And the other person in that film is Willem Dafoe, as this egotistical, pretentious film director called Carson Clay. One of the funniest things is his film at the Cannes Film Festival. It's absolutely stupid and pretentious, with kind of slow-mo and bits suddenly randomly running backwards, and it's going, Carson Clay and a Carson Clay production of a Carson Clay film. And, of course, he makes this stupid speech, doesn't he, before it starts about the human psyche or something, and then the translator just looks at him and then he says to the audience, "C'est très bon film." He says it's a very good film and we like that, and he says it so well, and he only has that one line, that guy, doesn't he? So everything really comes together in that film and makes it very funny.
Every time we watch Mr. Bean's Holiday, I look up Max Baldry online and find out that he was born in Poland to Russian parents and went to school in England, and that's why he looks quite exotic and speaks Russian and English and things like that. And doesn't he do an excellent job being Mr. Bean's main companion in the film?
Yes, he's got a lot of charisma. He's one of those kids who are very appealing on the screen. And then, of course, the three of them, Stepan, Sabine, and Bean, end up all together, and they are speaking three different languages, and they don't, any of them, really understand what the other two are up to. Well, I suppose Mr. Bean and Stepan know what they're up to.
Stepan thinks that Sabine is Mr. Bean's girlfriend. She thinks that Mr. Bean is Stepan's father. Terribly funny.
She ends up seeing on the news that the police are after him because he's kidnapped Stepan, and that's why she's asking him, "Who are you? Where are you going?" And he says, "To the beach," which makes us absolutely crack up.
And it's great the way he says no when she asks him, "You are not Russian." He has no idea why she thinks he's Russian, but we know why. He's accidentally told her he is.
And then, of course, he cares about Sabine wanting to see her premiere at the Cannes Film Festival because she was supposed to be in Carson Clay's film, so they do everything they can to get her to the film festival on time for her premiere, because Stepan could get there any time, really, couldn't he, to be reunited with his parents. But, of course, she's not in the film. She says during the premiere, she says, "He cut my seat."
That's one of our little phrases we say when appropriate.
Yes, and one thing I find very interesting is that in the deleted scenes it's got Mr. Bean just messing about in the projection room and just making the screen go all green and static and stuff. But then what they end up with is that he hooks up this camera which he's had the entire time and won as part of his raffle prize. It all seems so deliberate. He hooks it up so that over Carson Clay's voiceover about radiant smile and that kind of thing, and you are in the arms of another, and all this stupid narration, there's all this footage of largely Sabine and her adventures with Mr. Bean and Stepan. So it's like a sort of heartwarming, unlikely friendship kind of thing, like the whole film starring Sabine, and everyone gets to see her at the premiere, and he's helped her to get what she wants and be discovered as an actress. And I think it very odd that they only thought of that at the last minute, apparently, but it does seem very deliberate. And the clue in the final cut is when Willem Dafoe is saying, "Where's the projectionist?" You wouldn't really ask that. You'd ask, "Where's the guy who's put different footage on my film?" rather than "Where's the guy who's made all the film and stuff go wrong?" which is where you would want to know where's the projection.
So like in the first film though, Mr. Bean has a kind of adopted little family who he helps to get their lives sorted better in the end, although he himself helps to mess them up in many ways. In that case, Sabine and Stepan in the first film, Peter MacNicol, what's his character name? David, and his family, Mr. Bean helps to get the daughter Jennifer out of the coma, quite accidentally of course.
He could easily have killed her, couldn't he?
Yeah.
But because it's a comedy film, you can get away with Mr. Bean dangerously messing about with complicated surgery and stuff, because he gets the bullet out of that cop who's been shot, who we've seen a couple of times.
Yes, this cop has been surprised and unnerved by Mr. Bean ever since Mr. Bean arrived at the airport and was arrested for having a gun, which was really him pretending to have a gun with his fingers. And this cop has seen him doing crazy things and arrested him several times. Then, of course, in the end, Mr. Bean saves his life by accidentally finding a bullet inside him when he's trying to have an M&M. And that's the kind of wacky situation Mr. Bean gets into. But everything works out for the best for everyone in the end. I'll tell you something which I think is quite interesting that I think you don't know.
I don't know.
And probably listeners don't either. As you do know, we didn't watch the first episode of Mr. Bean when it was first on telly. I remember first seeing that on video at the house of the three boys down the road who had all sorts of videos that we first saw there and liked because of them. Back to the Future, Watership Down. They had this first episode of Mr. Bean on video as well. But I think where I first saw him on the telly was in this sketch for Comic Relief or Children in Need, one of those, and there's a few Mr. Bean sketches for those. But this was shortly after the first episode, I think. And then for years I thought, well, was that actually Mr. Bean? Or was it Rowan Atkinson trialling a character that then evolved into Mr. Bean for the series? Because what I remembered about it was that it was Mr. Bean, or pre-Mr. Bean, at the police station, trying to describe to this policewoman what had been stolen from his car in mime. He wasn't talking at all. And I remember how he mimed fish fingers. He did the sort of gulping fish mouth and then held up his fingers, and she wrote down that fish fingers had been stolen from his car. But for years I thought, well, that's not quite Mr. Bean, is it? Because Mr. Bean does talk when he absolutely needs to. He just chooses not to do it a lot of the time, and that's just part of his character. So that can't have been Mr. Bean himself, can it? They must have kind of developed Mr. Bean from there. But actually, I discovered on Wikipedia quite recently that that was Mr. Bean. It did air after the first Mr. Bean episode. He's actually unusually chatty in that first sketch of the exam, isn't he? I've been concentrating on trigonometry and stuff.
I believe they concentrated on calculus last year.
But the reason Mr. Bean wasn't then talking in this special that followed that was that he was doing a sponsored silence.
I see.
For Comic Relief or Children in Need or whichever one it was. And that was why they'd made a sketch out of him doing mimes to the policewoman. I thought, oh, that makes a lot of sense. You can see why that would have confused me, can't you? Because he doesn't talk much. So you might reasonably get that from a character who doesn't talk at all. But actually it was the other way around in a sponsored silence.
That's very clever, actually, because one does things like a sponsored silence for these charities, doesn't one? I don't think I've ever seen that in my life. Maybe it's on YouTube. I'll have to have a look. The Mr. Bean on Blind Date sketch for Comic Relief is on YouTube.
Yes, I haven't looked for the Fish Fingers sponsored silence one on YouTube, but I did want to find and watch properly after you'd watched it on YouTube, the Mr. Bean on Blind Date one, and it is hilarious. He does a lot of talking in that one, and he needs to. And a lot of the humour comes from him talking, saying that the other contestants are perverts and things. And that's unusual for Mr. Bean, but like in Bean the movie, it works very well in that situation.
We love his speech about painting, by the way, don't we? Everyone thinks that he's this eminent doctor of art history, and he's supposed to give this speech about Whistler's mother, and he's just absolutely making it up as he goes along with no idea what he's talking about. It begins quite big.
Sometimes we quote that, and we always used to go around saying we're getting quite near the end of this analysis, and we hadn't really said anything. It's absolutely brilliant.
All he said is it's quite big, but then he sort of turns it around and turns it into this very touching speech about family and how Whistler painted his mother, even though he's perfectly aware she was an old bat who looked like she's got a cucumber lodged up her backside or something like that.
A cactus.
Cactus, right, that's even worse. He thought the world of her and took the time to paint this picture of her, and then he relates it to staying with David and his family, and it's very sweet.
It's kind of a microcosm of the plots of the movies, really. It starts off as a complete disaster where he has no idea how it's going to turn out, and then it ends all up for the best and quite heartwarming and about friends and family, and we all get warm fuzzies. So there's an end to this podcast. Hopefully you'll join us again next time, which will be the last Sunday in June, for a podcast on Stressed Eric, a cartoon from the BBC straddling the turn of the 20th and 21st century, but certainly made quite an impression on our lives, and next time we'll tell you all about how and why. Until then,
good night out there.
Whatever you are.